For 20 years, Napoleon had been the most powerful man in Europe. He had fought and defeated all of his enemies, and he had built an empire, stretching from Spain to Russia, from Italy to Prussia. But now he was a prisoner in a remote Scottish castle with nothing but a handful of books for company. How did it come to this? How did Napoleon go from the glory of empire to the isolation of exile? This is a tale of betrayal, not by the people, but by the very institutions that he created. It's me. This is the story of Napoleon. We last saw Napoleon in 1812 after his disastrous invasion of Russia. By the time he returned to France, the coalition was at his doorstep and he was forced to flee to safety. In the south of France, Napoleon fortified the town of Rayons in anticipation of the coming storm. There he would make his last stand. But before we get to Napoleon's last stand, if you're enjoying this series and you want more stories like it, be sure to subscribe. Also, in a previous episode, I mentioned that Napoleon kept detailed notes of his military campaigns. If you want to read those firsthand, check out the link in the description below. You can read them right now for free. Napoleon's enemies came in two waves. The first was led by the Russians, who retook the city of Paris. Fearing the Russians would plunder the city, Napoleon ordered it to be He then took up a defensive position outside the city where he successfully beat back the Russian advance. But as soon as he won this battle, another army appeared on the horizon. It was the British under the command of the Duke of Wellington. Together, the British and the Russians pushed Napoleon back towards the south. Though Napoleon managed to hold them off for another month, eventually he would be forced to surrender. On June 1814, Napoleon abdicated the throne and gave up the fight. In exchange for his surrender, the Allies promised him a noble title and an annuity. They also stipulated that he would keep his fortune, but they would confiscate all of his military trophies. With that, Napoleon's reign as emperor came to an end. When Napoleon was exiled to Elba, the French throne was given to someone the Allies probably never even considered, the former King Louis XVIII. He was a Bourbon, which meant he was related to the old French royal family. More importantly, though, he was old and frail and probably wasn't going to do anything to troublesome. The Allies hoped that with Louis XVIII installed on the throne, they could go ahead and divide up France's continental empire among themselves. But Napoleon didn't think that was a very good idea. While living in exile, Napoleon wrote a letter to the leading members of the French government explaining why he thought their new king was a bad choice. It wasn't because he wanted the throne back. After all, he had agreed to give that up. It was because he cared about France. Napoleon explained that Louis XVIII was a weak leader who would be easily manipulated by the Allies. In particular, he warned them against making any deals with the British. They were only interested in one thing: taking as much French territory as they could. Napoleon ended the letter by giving the French elite an ultimatum. If they kept Louis XVIII on the throne, he would take back the empire. Otherwise, he would leave him alone. The French government ignored the letter and went ahead with plans to divide the country among the royal family and the nobility. When Napoleon heard this, he decided to take matters into his own hands. In February of 18, he escaped from Elba and set out for Paris. Along the way, he raised an army and grew it to over 70,000 men. Many of these soldiers were veterans of his old army. They followed him willingly. But Napoleon knew that to win over the rest of France, he needed popular support. So as he marched north, he went out of his way to gain the support of the common people. Wherever he stopped, he spoke to large crowds, reminding them of all the great things he had done during his reign. He talked about how he had brought stability to France after the Revolution, and how he had defended France against the coalitions. He emphasized how he had been exiled, not because he had done something wrong, but simply because he had become too powerful. As Napoleon made his way north, entire villages would come out to greet him. People cheered his name and waved French flags. Soon enough, he had the support of the people behind him. Now, all he needed was the support of the military. Once Napoleon reached Paris, the government didn't even bother fighting him. They knew that the people were on his side and that the military would follow him, so they just stepped aside and let him take back the throne. With the people, the military, and the government behind him, Napoleon was back in power and ready to take back what was rightfully his. The Allies weren't going to just let him take back his empire without a fight. In the summer of 1815, Napoleon faced off against the 7th Coalition in a series of battles known as the Waterloo Campaign. For over a month, he and his men fought across Belgium and northern France. On June, they faced off against the British, under the command of the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussians under the command of Leberecht von Blücher, at the Battle of Waterloo. It was a close fight, but in the end, Napoleon lost. Once again, Napoleon had been defeated and he knew that there was no place for him in France anymore. As soon as the Allies entered Paris, they began searching for him. They wanted to arrest him and bring him to justice. Luckily for Napoleon, a general named Louis Clark offered him a way out. Clark smuggled Napoleon out of the city in a carriage. Disguised as a commoner, Napoleon slipped out of Paris and headed to the coast. There, General Clark put him on a ship bound for America. From there, Napoleon traveled to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. It was here that Napoleon would spend the last 6 years of his life. He spent the first few years writing his memoirs, but eventually the work became too painful, and he turned to his books for solace. Though Napoleon was supposed to be exiled to St. Helena for life, he actually only lived there for 5 years. In 1821, he sickened from stomach cancer and died on May. He was only 51. Before his death, Napoleon made one last request. He asked to have the remains of his old army marshal, Michel Ney, returned to France. Ney had been executed for treason in 1815. Napoleon wanted him to be remembered as a hero. Though his request was denied, Napoleon's wish did eventually come true. In 1902, Michel Ney's remains were returned to France and given a hero's welcome. Napoleon's own remains, though, remained in St. Helena until 1840, when they were finally returned to France. Even still, to this day, Napoleon's tomb in Paris is one of the most visited monuments in the city. I hope you enjoyed this final episode on Napoleon. What's your favorite Napoleonic story? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks especially to my supporters for helping me tell these stories. Check out the links in the description if you want to see more from me.